Hello, welcome back to Conversations with Plastics News. I'm Joe Pryweller, Conference Director for Plastics News, and with me today is my distinguished guest, Bill Wood, who's Economics Editor for Plastics News and also a noted economist with Mountaintop Research. Bill, we're going to talk a little bit today about the Business Monitor, which I know you have a key hand in, and that's Plastics News' look at the quarter for North American manufacturing and plastics and where that's going. And we're going to look at some of the first quarter results and where we see this leading to in the future. Let's start by talking about some of the results as far as what we're seeing for the quarterly index. We're showing that manufacturing is fairly flat, but that plastics seems to be on a bit of an upswing. Can you comment on some of that?
That's what the quarterly index does show, is that if you look at sort of the macro indicators for the entire U.S. manufacturing sector, they hit a plateau in the fourth quarter or so, and they've risen very slowly, if at all. And there's actually even been some slippage in some of the manufacturing sectors in the U.S. in the first quarter of this year, out of the fourth quarter last year. But as it turns out, the plastics industry is bucking that trend. They're actually expanding in the first quarter, according to
Why do you think that is? Why do you think the plastics industry is outperforming overall manufacturing?
Well, they carried a lot of momentum into this year, into the first quarter. There were a lot of orders and things for plastics products. Packaging was starting to ramp up. But really, one of the best things that's happened is that the price of resins has actually come down a little bit. And that tracks very closely, the trend tracks very closely with oil price trends.
Sure.
And so as oil prices have gotten lower, resins prices have come down. And so that's kept demand for plastic materials and that kind of thing high. And
And how does that impact overall manufacturing if resin prices are down a little bit? How does that impact U.S. manufacturers?
Well, for the most part, it's good. There are a few sectors that actually, like the energy sector, is probably not as good, and maybe manufacturers of hard hats for people to wear while they're drilling for oil. They may not like it, but lower plastics prices, lower resins prices, lower energy prices help the consumer. They help the plastics processor. It makes resins and plastic products a little cheaper to make and a little cheaper to buy. It also puts money in the consumer's pockets because they're not spending it on gasoline or heating fuel, and so they actually have a little bit more disposable income. And so where you start to see that first showing up is they'll start to go out to dinner a few more times, or they'll spend a little bit more on health and beauty aids,
right,
and that kind of thing. So those are the sectors that start to move early when there's a increase in either an increase in incomes like we've seen, or a decline in gasoline and heating fuel prices.
So the rise in consumer demand is related to the success or the health of the plastics processing industry in some cases.
Right. If plastics processors can make something a little bit less expensive because it costs them less to make, and consumers have a little bit more money, that's a double benefit to the plastics industry. So yeah, that's what's actually helped the plastics industry through the first quarter, while some of the other manufacturing sectors haven't enjoyed that double benefit.
Great. Are there end markets or particular segments where you see the industry thriving more than others, at least in the first quarter and through 2015?
The research suggests that automotive remains pretty strong, and that packaging is starting to gain momentum. And interestingly enough, there was a pretty good response from the category that measures lawn and garden. And if you think about it, almost every snowblower in inventory has been sold to somebody in the Midwest or the Northeast.
Makes sense of the winter we've had, and I know that personally.
So there's a lot of snowblowers, a lot of plastics parts on those things, a lot of generators, a lot of plastics parts. And then the packaging sector, like I say, because of the food and beverage purchases, the health and beauty aids, the smaller, less expensive stuff, but people can actually trade up in quality, maybe go to a nicer place or buy a little bit more expensive brand of health and beauty aid, and they feel a little bit more confident to do that as their disposable income rises.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's not. I imagine it's not on big ticket items yet. It's more the small purchases that consumers are doing that's affecting some of this.
Exactly. The big ticket items automobiles continue to be pretty good. They're starting to show a little bit, that recovery is starting to show a little bit of fatigue. I think there will be a resurgence in automobiles, but the other things, if you think about appliances or bigger ticket items like furnishings and electronics, those are not, we're not yet seeing the movement there.
Sure.
So we expect that to be
Automotive's
later
been
this year.
encouraging, though. I know that's a major sector of plastics processors. Expect to see more purchasing of vehicles this year and more use of plastic parts on a lot of the vehicles. That
Absolutely. There's still, despite the fact that energy prices and gasoline prices are going down, there's still a very strong push to lower the weight of vehicles, increase the amount of fuel efficiency because of the CAFE standards that are coming up. So even though we're at what I think is a temporary and cyclical low point in the price of gasoline, there's still plans moving forward to make cars lighter and make them more fuel efficient, corrosive resistant, and so they're still taking weight out of automobiles. And that coupled with the fact that there's still, the average age of the U.S. automobile fleet is still quite old.
Right.
And so there's a lot of cars that continue to need to be replaced. So we're not seeing a lot of people purchasing multiple cars, but still a lot of replacement demand. And that's going to, we'll say the growth rate in that sector has decelerated, but it's still expanding.
Sure. Are the projections that that low oil prices, crude oil prices, are going to continue for a while? This is not a temporary hiccup that's going to change quickly, or is that hard to say?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I just read something recently, yesterday, an analyst suggesting that crude oil prices could bounce back upward very quickly as production in the U.S. is taken offline.
Sure.
And that remains to be seen that that's going to happen. The supply and demand dynamic is very closely watched and very closely calibrated and monitored, but the marketplace reaction to that is very difficult to predict.
Absolutely, yeah. The best minds can't always predict those things yet. Let's talk a little bit about the other element of the business monitors, that of the strong dollar, and what that's meant to processors. Can you explain a little bit about the spike in the dollar and what that has done for plastics processing here in the United States?
The spike is actually tied to pushing down resins prices. So the stronger dollar helps most processors, mainly because it's allowed resin or oil prices to fall, which allows resins prices to fall. But beyond that, the manufacturers that export a lot of stuff or compete against imported products, they're going to be more negatively affected by a strong dollar. But that is not the majority of the industry. The bulk of the industry is a domestic industry selling to domestic customers, and so they're getting a benefit of this price break brought on by a stronger dollar.
Right, and low resin prices too, I guess, in correspondence with that, right?
And so there is some short-term pain for some of our industry that deals with foreign markets, but the packaging sector and some of that is almost entirely domestic, and so they get a big kick out of it. But in the long run, a strong dollar is good for the entire economy.
Right.
There will be some pain for a few people. There will be some shock for a few people, and I'm sensitive to that. But the overall amount of activity will continue to rise and gain momentum and build over time if the dollar is strong and remains so.
I know there were survey results also in this that show that the attitude toward the economy and the financial outlook has improved among processors too, I imagine, compared to what they might have seen in the past, correct? I think we have something here that says 52% of companies think they'll be more profitable this year, which is one encouraging sign.
That was surprising to me a little bit because that's an increase from the fourth quarter. And so you would think that if business activity was starting to show a little bit of slowdown in the first quarter, maybe people would be slightly less optimistic. In fact, they're more optimistic. And what we're finding is that most processors are receiving less for the products that they ship, but they're able to pass along savings to their customers, or their customers are actually in many cases demanding the savings from the lower resins prices. So it becomes all about margin at that point. So processors are paying less for material, they're getting less for their product, but there's less pressure on their margin.
I see. So even if they're selling it for less cost, they're less money, they're able to gain more profit because of resin cost. In other words, resin prices have gone down more than the price decrease might have gone, right?
Right. So they are getting less for their products. That the prices they receive for their products have declined, but that's due to their lower materials costs. And the fact that the overall price of the product is going down has strengthened demand in many cases for those products. It's actually made certain types of packaging products more viable and more easy to sell or to pass savings on to consumers. And like I say, in those packaged type of health and beauty aids, food, those kind of sectors.
Sure, and that's affected attitudes, I guess, generally. I see that a vast majority have a favorable attitude toward the economy right now, and hence toward their business growth too, I imagine, right?
The processing sector has a very optimistic outlook for the rest of this year about business conditions, and that's across all of the various processor types. And we interview injection molders, blow molders, extruders, and even the category which came in with the lowest overall index would be film and sheet extruders for certain segments like construction, if that's their end market, or the profile pipe and tubing guys. Right now they're not feeling it, so they have a little bit lower index value, but they actually, ironically, have the highest value for future expectations. They actually are looking for a turnaround.
So good prognosis in the longer term for these companies if they think that this is going to stay, and they have the economy, which helps folks here at MPE and in general for the industry.
I think the people that come to MPE, the customers are very happy. I think when happy customers walk into booths, it makes the exhibitors very happy.
Sure.
And so the overall mood is very upbeat, and that's supported by the statistics and the survey results.
Great. Impact globally with some of this too. I know that the European markets, for instance, at least Southern Europe, are still a little bit shaky as far as the economy goes and debt control goes in those areas and elsewhere. How is that being impacted as far as U.S. companies?
Well, that's probably the biggest macroeconomic risk to the forecast. If there were to be a sort of a meltdown or a messy situation with Greece or some of that Southern European stuff as it affects the euro, or Spain or Italy, if there was that contagion there, I think that is the one of the large geopolitical macroeconomic risks to the optimistic forecast, is that could affect the U.S. Now, most U.S. companies and U.S. banks are very well insulated against that kind of an activity. But many of the manufacturers and stuff are less well insulated, and that does tend to have a domino effect that would put a kind of a cooling effect on the global economy. But on the other hand, because the rest of the world is not as strong, by contrast, the U.S. looks like a particularly good place. So anybody with money to invest or money to spend is looking at the U.S. as the place they want to be. And that in the long run is actually the kind of activity we want to encourage. We want investment in the U.S. and we want people to come purchase stuff from the U.S.
Any final thoughts you have on the state of the economy longer term for plastics processors as we go throughout 2015 and beyond?
I think that all of the political problems aside, the pace of growth in the U.S. economy is relatively slow still. And whereas it seems like that's not good, what that really means is that we have the ability to sustain that over the longer term. So all of the risks going forward, all of the things going forward are sort of political in nature. And whereas those are legitimate risks, they're not anything that we can really do anything about. And the good news is as far as the financial system goes, the overall consumer, because household incomes are rising, the labor market is getting better with each passing month. The things that we need to see happen that are within our control and our purview are actually steadily improving. So the environment in the U.S. for business, for manufacturing, continues to get better and better. And we're spending more money on new factories. I don't know that I could say there's an official reindustrialization strategy for the U.S.
Right.
But we do have a very strong environment that's pro-business and pro-manufacturing in terms of the economy. And so the political stuff, regulations, who gets elected, those are, and what things happen in foreign policy, the biggest risk. But the things that we would typically worry about, consumers, manufacturers, supply and demand, all very positive.
Great.
Growing steadily, and that's the outlook for the indefinite future.
Great. Well, thank you, Bill, for a great conversation with Plastics News. Again, Bill Wood of Mountaintop Economics and Research, and also economics editor of Plastics News. And we hope that the positive outlook continues. It looks like good signs, at least from what we're showing here in our Business Monitor. Thank you, Bill.
Thanks, Joe.